Imagine we're both sitting, we're looking at each other's eyes, Imagine above my head, somewhere around there, about 7 inches, right on top of my head, 7 inches above your head in the back of your head. Imagine that you see 2 eyes behind you that are looking through your cranium, right through your skull, looking through your eyes. When I'm looking at Paul, it's actually the divine eyes looking uniquely through my eyes. And when Paul's looking at me, it's the divine eyes looking uniquely through Paul. So when Paul and Marc meet, it's God meeting God uniquely in a way that the divine never encountered herself or himself ever before.
Welcome to Living 4D with Paul Chek. Today, Paul welcomes back Dr. Marc Gafni. Dr. Gafni is a visionary thinker, social activist, and passionate philosopher. He is known for his source code teachings, including unique self theory, the 5 selves, the amorous cosmos, a politics of evolutionary love, a return to eros, and digital intimacy. He is the author of over 25 books, holds a doctorate in philosophy from Oxford University, as well as Orthodox Rabbinic ordination. He teaches on the cutting edge of philosophy and spirit in the West, with the aim of participating in the articulation of what Dr. Gafni, together with Dr. Zach Stein and colleagues, are calling cosmo-erotic humanism. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and a warm review on the podcast platform of your choice. Your opinions matter, and your ratings help us to grow and help more people to be healthy, find freedom of body and mind, and to live their dreams. A big thank you to our premier sponsors, Bioptimizers, Paleo Valley and Organifi, and our podcast sponsors, Ned and Wild Pastures. Their support is essential in producing this podcast, and we hope you will show your support by visiting them online and trying all the amazing products that they produce. Please check the show notes for links and details. Today's topic of conversation between Paul and Marc is exploring the self.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Living 4D with Paul Chek. Today, our title is Exploring the Self with somebody I love dearly, Marc Gafni, who has written a lot about the self. And I can tell you from studying his works, I recently listened to on audiobook his book called The Self, and it was absolutely friggin' phenomenal.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yes. Well, welcome, Marc. Thank you. It's so lovely to just share space with you again.
Paul, I am madly delighted to see you.
Thank you.
Right? And, you are a force of nature.
Aha!
And just, being together is just a complete delight. And it's, if I can put a first kind of idea or realization or experience into the space, there's a very beautiful idea in the Hebrew wisdom tradition, which is called lishma, Lishma, which means for its own sake.
Yes.
Right? It's not for something else. So when Paul and Marc hang out, it's joy for its own sake.
Yeah, baby.
That's it. We don't need to get anywhere because we're already here. And I'm madly delighted to be with you and just mad honor to you and your work, my friend. I'm in.
Thank you.
Inside.
Well, just as we start off, what I love about dialogue with you is you always help me find another dimension. So
Awesome.
even though I've looked into these things a lot that we talk about, you've taken such unique angles on things, and you have this genius that knows how to integrate, and it's so I love the alchemist that lives inside of you. And
Thank you. And just to be clear, whenever someone calls me a genius, I know that there are people of great depth and perception, right? So, I'm madly delighted. Let's do this. And self is just, there could not be anything more important than self.
especially
And I
today.
know that you, especially today. And I mean, if you would ask me what's the single most important question that any human being ever has to answer, it is, who am I? Who am I? That is we have what we call the 3 great questions of cosmo-erotic humanism, which is our new story of value. And we say the questions are who, where, and what. And who am I? Where am I? Right? What's the nature of the universe? And then what's there to do? And all of it, all those 3 questions are inextricably related. And without that, you can't make love. You can't experience depth and meaning. You can't experience joy. You don't know how to hold brokenness. You can't deal with trauma. Nothing actually works without the most accurate and resonantly alive answer to those three questions. And by the way, there are right and wrong answers to those questions. The postmodern notion is, oh, everyone has their own notion. No, that's bullshit, right? There's actually more accurate and less accurate information in cosmos, right? And so let's go for this. This is such a great gift. I follow you, sir.
Well, everybody has their own notions of gravity, but they all fall off their ladders and roofs.
Right, exactly, right? And that's so important, right? There are structures to cosmos that are real, right? And this is different than the dogma of the church, which didn't have access to always the inner structures of cosmos, but actually created beliefs that you and I talked about last time and said you have to believe even though you have no access to it and even though there's no evidence for it in your interior. So you and I are complete anti-dogma, but we stand in and we're practitioners of and cultivators of what we might together call the interior sciences.
And we also
and the interior sciences are real.
Yeah, we must remember that, wasn't it Galileo? I can't remember, Galileo or Copernicus, who said, wait a minute, the Earth's not the center of the universe here. Look through my telescope, and they wouldn't look.
They wouldn't look. There was, Copernicus started the game and Galileo and right. And so, and we can find evidence, not just in exteriors. There's also evidence in interiors. So when we talk about the nature of self, it's not like, oh, wow, Paul or Mark made up an idea and they're trying to sell that idea. That's completely uninteresting. If we actually gather the validated insights of all of the great wisdom traditions, pre-modern, modern, and postmodern, and integrate them together in a whole greater than the sum of the parts and express it with direct clarity, I call it second simplicity, the simplicity after complexity, then we can actually articulate an accurate notion of self without which there's no success, there's no joy, there's no goodness, there's no integrity, there's no love, there's no making love, there's no beauty. So let's do this.
All right. Well, Mark, as you know, there are different schools of philosophy and different religions, particularly Western versus Eastern, that not to mention the various camps in neurosciences, psychology, consciousness research, all having different notions of the self. Some say the self is used interchangeably with the ego. It's something to be extinguished. Others say there is nothing there to extinguish. Others say the self and the ego are merely products of the brain. Those making the statements for and against the self are many, but they do not distinguish between little s-e-l-f, capital S, little e-l-f, or capital S, capital E, capital F. Since you wrote your excellent book, Self in Integral Evolutionary Mysticism, Two Models and Why They Matter, you obviously believe in the self and can go even further into the self camp than most. And you also define a unique and an authentic self. I personally subscribe to the concept of the small s, small e, small l, small f as the wholeness of the individual, capital S-E-L-F as the wholeness of the individual, as well as all the people, relationships, places, and things that sustain the individual's self and life, which would be a Jungian concept. And I distinguished capital S, capital E, capital L, capital F, all caps, as the experience of consciously experiencing and realizing oneself as one with the all, the cosmos, even the spirit of it all, or God. So to begin our journey into the self today, could you please share, and there's two parts to this question, A, what the self is in your conception? Do you feel that are different levels of the self as a reality, such as little self, capital S-E-L-F, that I've just described, and your thoughts on why what seems to be fairly obvious to me from empirical observation and self-reflection and spiritual investigation to the self, that it's led to such radical different notions of the self at any level, and why some deny the self and the pitfalls of seeing the self as only a product of the brain and the nervous system and all that crazy shit.
This is huge. So so permission, and I'm in your living room, and so etiquette and permission. Can I do a brief segue 2-minute conversation with you, which will then lead us to that whole set of questions? Is that okay?
Hey man,
okay.
The only rule here is share your love and have a good time.
Hallelujah, as
Yeah.
the Bible says. I think that's a direct quote from Psalms 39.
It must be.
So here we go. We have scripture on this. So why the fuck does it matter? Why would anyone want to hear these two guys, right, philosophers talking about self? Why do we care? And the reason we care is because if we don't get this right, we're going to go extinct. So
what a concept.
Right? I mean, and strangely, I'm actually not talking, as you know, my dear friend, I'm not talking figuratively.
No, I know.
I'm not talking I know you do. I'm not talking metaphorically. Our capacity to get the answer to this question right is the single greatest chance we have of actually avoiding existential risk, responding to the meta crisis, and actually, as we're poised between utopia and dystopia, the answer to the question of self is going to determine which way we go. And I'm going to just try and deepen that with you just for 2 minutes and then throw it back across the net if I can. There's a principle in complexity theory. And complexity theory, as I'm sure you know, is in part, there's several parts, but in one part sourced in a famous essay by Turing, the code cracker in World War II. Then, the essay is called Morphogenesis. And he asks a question there. He says, where the fuck does complexity come from? Why in where's it come from? And he basically says in a word, and I'm obviously oversimplifying, but essentially what he says is there are simple first rules and principles. And if you iterate them again and again and again, you apply these simple first rules and principles again and again, you generate a coherent, complex world. He's asking, how do you have coherent complexity? In other words, how does reality exist? How do we have a coherent universe? He says, because you have simple first rules, and simple first rules generate coherence.
Yes.
Now, the meta crisis is a global intimacy disorder, which means a breakdown in coherence at the core of the system.
Yes.
So how do you generate coherence? You need to reiterate simple first rules, which then iterated all the way up and all the way down the system, change the vector of the whole thing. Now, what's the simple first rule or first principle? The answer to the question of who are you and where are we? It's very beautiful. I mean, it's gorgeous, right? And that's how I answer that question of who are you and where are we? The simple answer to that, how I hold in my body, life, mind, heart, the answer to that question, those are the two simple first rules and principles that actually that reality is generated from. Now I'm going to add one more piece. The people who would kind of lock the world, as we talked about 2 conversations ago, in a Skinner's box, and kind of control the world, create a planetary stack in which everyone's controlled, what they correctly say is that there are billions of interactions between people which are unconscious, which you can use the structures of an AI-generated algorithmic process that micro-targets you to cause you to choose and act in a particular way. What they get right is that there's billions of interactions that emerge from an unconscious answer to the question of who I am. So if I say I'm a small separate self, and I need certain kind of fulfillment of the ego, and it's me against you, and it's a win-lose metrics, and I can feel wounded or insulted, so I can get you to do something by traumatizing you, by insulting you, by goading you, by getting you to respond to groups of friends who you want approval from, by likes, right? In other words, that's how we control you. But if I actually realize that actually they're right, there are billions of interactions that determine and create the world, but those billions of interactions that we do unconsciously change if you give a different answer to the question of who are you, right? And where am I? So this Paul Chek podcast on the self, this is not, oh, Paul's having some philosophical conversation with his friend, Dr. Mark. Hey, let's hang out and talk about the self in a yellow shirt and a black shirt and see if they match. Okay. It's not that. They might not. I'm not sure. Yellow, black kind of go pretty well together with black, right? But actually the future of the world quite literally hangs in the balance, because if we can articulate the most compelling and accurate answer to the question of who are you and download that into the source code of culture, we can change the vector of history, and actually only the best answer or a better answer or a deeper answer to the question of self has ever changed the trajectory of history. So I just want to get the momentousness. I mean, the angels are dancing with us, right? Heaven is listening. The world hangs in the balance. And if someone will say, Gafni, he's fucking grandiose, all that means is, with total respect to that person, is respectfully, you don't get it. Actually, it actually does hang in the balance. And actually, the thing that we can change is it's the direct hit that takes down the Death Star, right? You can't take down, right, the Empire, but if you score a direct hit, it changes everything. The direct hit is the answer to the question of self, who am I? So I just want to hold with you, my brother. After all of, and you and I kind of we could just play for a day, which is madly delightful. And as we play, just to hold, which I know that you know this in your body, you live this and breathe this, the utter insane gravitas, we got to get this right. So away we go. That's our context, if that works for you.
It's totally the context. I couldn't agree more. I mean, I could make the whole podcast just a response to what you just said, because it is ultimately, if you don't know who you are, then you don't have a self-conception, and therefore you don't know who's making the choices, and you always think it's somebody else doing something to you because you're unconscious of the ramifications of the choices you're making.
Right? Absolutely. And you generate your entire reality from within the story of who am I, within the answer to the question of who am I. And we think it's an invisible framework. And that's what's so important. To most people, it's invisible, right? We live in these inescapable, invisible frameworks from which we generate reality. And actually, the book that you read begins with that notion of we live in inescapable frameworks. And the core framework is the answer to the question of who am I? So let's do this.
And the introduction to that book was, if a person only read the introduction to your book, The Self, I think they would probably have an enlightening moment, because you encapsulated so much on the self just in the introduction. I couldn't stop listening to the damn thing. I'm like, holy shit, this is freaking juicy, man. Now, I wanted to loop back for 1 second, because you were talking about simplicity to complexity. And what I've noticed in my life's work and observations is that simplicity becomes complexity as the number of relationships grows. For example,
that's absolutely true. Yes,
I'm a business owner. When it was just me and Penny, it was simple. When we had 60 employees, it was a lot of complexity. I've got 2 wives. When it was just me and Penny, it was simple. But when it was me, Penny, and Angie, now there's more complexity. And then 2 kids came along, and then gardeners and housekeepers, and it's just like, oh. So what I've what I've learned is that the bifurcation, the simplicity becomes complexity through the number of relationships, because each of us is a unique self. There's always a bifurcation. None of us, me and you are never going to be perfectly parallel, because if we did, we couldn't really enjoy learning from each other.
We couldn't. And we totally. And we'll get to unique self. But I just want to say, we're going to get to that. But just to talk about just what you said right now, simplicity to complexity, and that complexity comes from complexity is a word that obfuscates what's really happening, which is a multiplying of relational nodes and relational meetings, which is absolutely true. And let's now add a third level, which is now when you get to complexity, because I can't leave you in complexity over there, King Paul, right? We got to get to that, right? So we can get to second simplicity. And it's the second simplicity is when actually everyone has the best answer and the best lived experience of who am I, and then everyone begins to actually play their unique self instrument in the unique self symphony, and we're all playing different instruments of the same music. All of a sudden, what seemed to be complexity now starts to become coherent second simplicity.
Yes.
Coherent second simplicity.
Yeah.
And if just one person in the system doesn't have a sense of who am I, or has a misguided or too small or too grandiose or inappropriate, right, sense of self, or where they're trying to steal someone else's sense of self, they're in imitation instead of being in their own originality, right, playing their own unique instrument, then the entire symphony's out of tune. And we both know what that feels like.
Yes.
Right? And so,
You know what came
so let's
to
do
me?
self.
What came to me as you were speaking is a flashback of a myriad of experiences I've had running workshops. Or, for example, when I have 60 people here in my rock garden, it's very dangerous. People can get hurt real bad. And so what I do is I take them through a shamanic harmonization process where we all make music together, and we start with a real simple beat. And we all lock into each other, and then I pick up everyone's vibration. We do this sometimes for 30 minutes. But what I'm leading to is it starts off very simply, just we're holding a 1, 2, 3, 4 beat. And there's always people that are out of harmony. You can hear whose ego's got to be heard and they're off beat, and who's got to throw a twist in it. And so sometimes I have to stop them and say, hey, we have to work together so no one gets hurt. We've got to become like a hive of bees. And we keep going until all of a sudden the simplicity of the rock becomes a complexity of decoherence. Then it comes into the coherence. And when when the coherence comes, there is an expansion. The second simplicity is not only an expansion, but to use your term, it comes with an erotic expansion where we all penetrate each other. We feel each other. We don't even have to look at each other. And it's the wildest thing. I've got aerial videos taken from a drone of people working with me in the rock garden after I've done this harmonization, and it is the wildest thing. They look like they're all being driven by an orchestra conductor, like a hive of bees, and it's just stunning to watch, and nobody's gotten hurt yet because of that.
Yeah, that's gorgeous. Well, Paul, that is beyond gorgeous. You just described what I'm calling the unique self symphony, and I would just add one thing to the beauty, but not something that takes away, but just amplifies the beauty that you just described. So you just did two things, just, home run, bases loaded, bottom of the ninth, right? One is you described the movement from first simplicity to complexity to second simplicity. So you gave a lived realization of that Dharma. But second, you described the Dharma, which we're going to get to later, of unique self symphony. So it's great just to have it in the space. We'll get deeply into it later, but unique self symphony, which is, I would call it a beehive plus, because, right, the interiority of the human being, as you and I, of course, both know, is profoundly different than that of a bee. But there's a continuum. We're on the same continuum. But this is a place where people actually, through the simple beat of music, actually begin, at least for that period of time, to attune to their own irreducible uniqueness. But their uniqueness becomes not that which alienates, but that which attunes them to the larger framework in which they can express what I would call their higher individuation beyond ego in the context of the larger unique self symphony. That's the vision of reality. The vision of reality that can respond to the meta crisis is a planetary awakening in love through unique self symphonies. And perhaps what we can do is we can now go back to your question.
Yeah, well,
now we have
one thing I want to.
Now we have enough context.
We
please,
do.
of course.
Because you always do this to me.
I do. I apologize. Sincerely.
What you've done in the last sentence or two, to me, is describe the authentic purpose, function, and practice of religion. The real meaning of religion.
That's correct.
That's what
Gorgeous.
it is.
Rock star. And the reason it's always so delightful to talk to you is because of the clarity of how you hear, right? Which is just an absolute delight. But that's exactly correct, right? Religion is about at its best, right? And we need to actually enact a new world religion as a context for our diversity. We have a desperate need for a universal grammar of value, not a homogenizing, but as a context for our diversity in response to the meta crisis. And what religion is intended to do in this new world religion, in this second order dynamic, is religare, to reconnect, meaning, but how do you reconnect? You reconnect through uniqueness. And we literally want to enact, and I want to say the sentence again, a higher individuation beyond ego, right? In the context of a larger unique self symphony, which then causes, as a movement of eros, it cultivates a culture of eros, which enacts a planetary awakening in love through unique self symphonies. And it's only that kind of self-organizing reality that can respond to the meta crisis And in a certain sense, what we need to do now, and I think that's what you were intending, I'm just expressing with your permission what seems to be your intention that I'm madly aligned with. Let's now go back and unpack everything we need to know to understand those last 4 sentences so that we can come back to those sentences at the end and say, wow, this is what self means. This is what higher individuation beyond ego means. This is what unique self symphony means. This is what a planetary awakening and love through unique self symphonies is. And we can download this, merging our hearts and minds, right, in this new source code eruption of tenderness and also fierce audacity in trying to land this which desperately needs to be landed. So I'm all in, my friend.
Hello, everybody. Happy holidays. You know, the holidays are typically a time when we overeat or eat foods that we don't normally indulge in, and this can cause digestive upsets, bloating, skin eruptions, bags under your eyes, congestion, immune stress, brain fog, joints, aches and pains, and overall stress on our digestive system. It's all about having a good time, but I also like to enjoy holidays without having to endure the collateral damage we so often experience. Bioptimizer's Masszymes are not only very powerful digestive aids made with the most advanced enzyme technology in the world today, they can effectively break down and aid metabolism of foods that our mind loves, but our body may not love so much. Support your digestion this holiday with Bioptimizer's Masszymes and support your wallet with a special discount for Living 4D listeners. Go to masszymes.com, that's masszymes.com/Paul10, lowercase Paul 10, and use the promo code lowercase Paul 10 to save 10% on a bottle of Masszymes. Purchase more than one bottle or subscribe to monthly auto ship and save even more. Once again, to get your Masszymes, go to masszymes.com/Paul10 with the code Paul10. With Masszymes, you can have fun on your holidays and beyond and know that you're supporting your body too. Enjoy.
There's a lot of different conceptions of the self, but I really buy into Jung's conception because I've studied many, many versions of it from philosophy and religion and everything you can think of. But what I experience as a human being is that the way I find myself is by consciously contributing to the wholeness that allows me to have agency as an individual. So I simplified that
Beautiful.
to 4 doctors: Dr. Happiness, Dr. Diet, Dr. Quiet, and Dr. Movement. I have to be conscious of what's happy making for me, or I'm waiting for someone else to do it. I have to move my body enough to keep it healthy, or I'm always dealing with what seems not self, something that needs to be medicated or drugged or cut out. I've also got to eat well so that I can take care of myself and feed myself, or I'm dealing with more problems that seem to be not self. I have to have a relationship with myself where I self-reflect, which is what I'm calling Dr. Quiet. You got to be in yourself and with yourself and have a relationship with yourself. And then you also have to have enough rest that you're not constantly struggling to, keep your awareness online. So my point is, I see the little self as our first journey is to become conscious of what it takes to create wholeness within ourselves. And then we naturally become aware, I can't be this healthy person without that farmer, and I can't be this healthy person without the water, and I can't be this healthy person without the atmosphere and the air, and I can't be this healthy person without the beauty, the warmth, and the power of the sun. So now my self-conception gets a capital S, and I go, God, I couldn't exist without the earth, the water, the fire, the air. And then when you realize that, you all of a sudden realize, none of this could exist without the galaxy or the universe. So I see the self grows from this growing into one's wholeness to realizing what gives you that opportunity to ultimately what carries it all. So with that preface, I'm just giving you my sense of the self. And I'd love you to say,
I love it.
What is the self to Marc Gafni?
No, I love it. I love it. Right. In other words, and I think what is the self to kind of in our best take on reality. So first off, I think that was just an insanely beautiful and accurate set of sentences that you just threw on the table, and I loved actually all of them.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna emerge out of that, my brother. So let's see if we can distinguish, and I want to try and throw 2 vectors, two conceptions on the table. We're going to take them slow one at a time. But the overarching principle is that myself is the most whole, most full experience of my identity. Now, the first level experience of self, right? The default experience of self, or let's call it the superficial vision of self, or the unreflective vision of self, or the unconscious vision of self, or the automatic vision of self. We get the point, right? It's what Daniel Kahneman, and Herb Simon in their Nobel Prize winning work called the self that we attribute as being self in our fast thinking, right? Our fast thinking is basically a skin encapsulated ego, which we have this illusion that it's whole unto itself. And we realize we need to take care of it. So we do, if we're a healthy separate self, we realize I got to nurture it physically, and I got to move it, and I've got to give it sufficient experiences to give it some notion of happiness. And so we got to address what, Paul Chek calls the four doctors, which are really important. And I've got some sense of my some level of a more whole version of my separate self. Now, that is absolutely true, right? The separate self, let me say it this way, the separate self exists in the mind of God, right? In other words, clearly, when Penny, right, or Angie, sits down, later tonight or tomorrow, and they want to kind of get a little warm and cuddle up, they really want Paul to be there and not Mark, right? In other words, they're like, oh, whoops, we want Paul, not Mark, wrong guy.
I should probably
wrong
ask
guy.
Before you assume. They might want you
don't, please don't, right. But in other words, the point is, right, in other words, separate self matters. There's Paul and Mark, and that's real, right? And obviously, and anyone who says that's an illusion, obviously is dissociated from reality. And we've got too many spiritual teachers, right? That's an illusion. Separate self's an illusion. It's not an illusion.
No.
It's real. It's the first step of self. It's obviously real.
Well, the problem with,
however,
just one interjection, the people
please.
that say it's an illusion don't realize that they're in an illusion, and illusions tend to generate illusions. And the problem is
illusions generate illusions.
And illusions believe in their illusions.
They do. And what we're saying is that the separate self is real. And, we talked about this once, but this is a good place to come back to like a really deep conversation here. Let's call the separate self a puzzle piece. It's a puzzle piece.
It is.
Right? And it's a puzzle piece. It's got its own idiosyncratic borders.
Yep.
And the puzzle piece has this great desire to walk straight. The only thing is, if you've ever been a puzzle piece, it's hard to walk straight and tall because puzzle pieces are a little crooked. So the puzzle piece has this sense, they're telling me this is all there is, and I'm eating well, and I'm hanging with Dr. Happy, and I'm doing movements, and I'm hungry, right? But still I feel profoundly incomplete, and I feel a little depressed, and Prozac's not helping. And so I'm kind of feeling there's got to be a puzzle someplace. But then I read Yuval Harari, for example, who's a parrot of postmodern reductive materialism. And I realize, there is no larger puzzle. It actually doesn't exist. There's no ontology, there's no realness to an intrinsic larger field of wholeness that's filled with value, that's intrinsic and real, that's alive, that I'm part of. There is no field of consciousness. There is no field of the divine, right? That it's an illusion.
Yeah.
All I really am is separate self. Now, that's pretty depressing.
It is. It's isolating.
Right? Because it's isolating. And if I have this yearning inside of me for my puzzle piece to fit into some larger puzzle, and then mainstream society in its psychologies, in its philosophies, and in its media tells me there's no fucking puzzle. That's crazy making, actually. That causes mental breakdown. The reason we have a level of mental breakdown that's unparalleled, there's 4 or 5 reasons, but one of them is a broken conception of self. So now we got to take step 2. We got a drum roll in the house. Drum roll. Hold on 1 second. Drum roll. Anyone at home?
Yes, bring it on.
Bring it. So
conception of self unveiled.
Level 2, unveiled. Level 2. Here we go. So level 2, we move from separate self to what we're going to call true self. And true self begins to be, now you describe, now I want to go really slow here. And anyone who thinks they can't follow, you can. We're going to take this slow. It's crazy simple. So what Paul talks about earlier is what I'm going to call the exterior of true self. Now I'm going to talk about the interior of true self. So I'm going to do the interior first. The interior is the realization that true self is the field of consciousness. And the field of consciousness is infused with value. It's not, as my Buddhist friends who I love madly, right, but who say mistakenly in certain schools, they say, no, it's just a field of awareness. It's not just awareness. It's a field of eros. It's a field of desire.
Yeah.
Right? It's a field of consciousness. It's a field of value, right? That's a mistake to say it's pure awareness. It's not, right? It's a living, throbbing, pulsing field. We know that through direct realization. So that's one. So it's this field, and it's this field of which I am an indivisible part. So myself is an indivisible part of this larger field, which is the wholeness, which is the field of desire, the field of value, the field of consciousness, the field of eros, the field of intimacy, the field of fuck. It's the fuck of the cosmos. It's the throbbing, pulsating tumescence of cosmos, which is in me, as me, and through me, which I'm inseparable from. Now, so far, that's really good news. Here comes the bad news. The bad news is that what teachers then do very often, and traditions do, is they say, okay, so you're not a puzzle piece. That's just an illusion. You're not just a puzzle piece. There's just the one, the puzzle, the one. And you think there are little lines separating the puzzle pieces? That's an illusion, my friend. There's just the one. But 1 second, I feel like I'm also a separate self. No. Die on the cushion. Sit more and realize the illusion of separate self. There is only true self. That is just as crazy making as saying there's only separate self.
That's because it's just generating another illusion. It's just mirror image of the illusion. It's just generating
another illusion.
Yeah.
But let's bring this in, but I want to bring this into sync with what you said. So what you said is that, well, let me go one step before that. Because again, I want a person to be able to listen and get every step and just get it like in complete enlightened realization of it. What true self says is that actually my identity is not just me. I am part of the field, and I'm dependent on that field of consciousness. I don't exist without the field of consciousness. Paul, what you said is that in exteriors, I don't exist without the plankton in the ocean. I don't exist without the biosphere. Right? I don't exist without, right, so many structures of reality. So to say that I'm I without all of the structures of Gaia, without all the structures of the cosmos, is absurd. And of course, now we can see that in a way we never could. I can see in exteriors, there's no me without topsoil, right?
Yeah.
There's no me without ecosystems. So the notion that there's a separate me that actually exists without all these systems is a lie. So that's true in two ways. It's true in interiors. There's no me without the field of consciousness. And B, there's no me without the field of physical reality, of which I'm literally don't exist without it. So now we're saying something very, very, very sharp. Now it gets to be a fucking blow away and beautiful. We're saying my identity, myself, is made up of anything without which I can't live. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. So I can't live without the larger field of consciousness. I also can't live without the biosphere. And I also can't live without a set of relationships. And I also can't live without, the coral reefs. So my identity is made up of everything that without that, I would not be alive. That's very beautiful.
It is. I just want to drop back 1 second.
Please take it in. Take it away, sir.
Just
we're up to true self.
Just to bring a tiny bit of clarity, my 4-doctor model, the interior comes through Dr. Quiet, which is the period which we are meant to devote to self-reflection, introspection, being in with, looking in, analyzing shadow. Did I do my best today? Who am I really? What is love in me? How do I express love? So
Dr. Quiet shows up in one way in separate self, because in separate self, I could do a version of Dr. Quiet and go to therapy and listen to meditative tapes and go to New Age seminars.
Well, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about.
I know you're not. So I'm saying Dr. Quiet evolved. And I think you're talking about something very, very deep, like you always do. I'm saying there's a Dr. Quiet at the level of separate self. Then there's a much deeper Dr. Quiet at the level of true self.
Yes, I'm simply saying for
Is that fair?
Yeah, I'm saying here's what I'm saying for crystal clarity. I'm saying that my
yes, sir.
expression of the interior can be synthesized down to you can't really understand the self if you don't nurture and engage and participate fully in the
Beautiful.
love of and relationship with yourself, your consciousness,
Beautiful.
your emotions, your reality. Because if,
I
as
love that.
above, so below, as inside, so outside, if you don't take responsibility for the interior to the degree that you take care of the outer, you always have an imbalance. And so you're inviting chaotic experiences all around
Hallelujah.
you.
Completely received. So exteriors and interiors all the way up and all the way down.
Yeah.
Totally in.
Yeah.
Okay, are we ready for a drum roll?
Give it to
We
me.
got a drum roll?
Thank you.
Okay, so now we go to the next level of self.
Yes.
Now we're at unique self. So unique self, you realize, oh, there's not just a puzzle piece. There's not just a puzzle. There's a puzzle piece that completes the puzzle in a way that no one that ever was, is, or will be could complete the puzzle.
Yeah.
Unique self is reality having a Paul Chek experience.
Yes.
That all of reality is having a Paul Chek experience, and reality has never had a Paul Chek experience before. It never, right, will have another generation of Paul Chek experience. The unique experience of that configuration of energy, which is Paul Chek, which will have continuity after death, but the unique experience of how it is right now is in this world, in this manifest world, reality is being Paul Chek, and reality is ecstatic being Paul
Yes.
Chek.
And I
Right?
believe we are dreamed into our unique self by God or source, because the puzzle of life is dynamic. It's not a fixed puzzle on a board. And so, because God, by definition, is wholeness, it always is exploring its wholeness, and therefore it takes wholeness to undergrid or support.
Okay, so now you're going. Now we're going. We got to go a little crazy now. Okay, so we
Yeah.
got to go. Can we go a little crazy?
Of course.
Got to go a little crazy now. So what you're implying is, which I think is absolutely right, and with your permission, brother, I'm going to spell it out.
Yeah, go for it.
You're implying one of the deepest realizations that's ever been had by humanity ever in world history, which is there's more God to come.
Absolutely,
Right?
always.
And always, right? So meaning, so if God is wholeness, how could there ever be more wholeness? But actually there can be.
Yes.
Right? God is wholeness. Shlemut, writes one interior scientist, Abraham Cook. God is shlemut, wholeness, hamishtalemet, which is becoming more whole. And how does godness become more whole? Through becoming Paul Chek, through becoming an irreducibly unique, crystallized prism of divinity called Paul Chekness that actually makes God more whole. The last sentence, and I'll shut the fuck up.
No,
which is,
please
and
do.
if Paul Chek, right? I mean, it's awesome. If Paul Chek stops being Paul Chek and he starts being Marc Gafni, God says, shit. Right? You know what I mean?
Paul's
That's
confused.
right. And God gets confused.
Yeah.
because God, right? Because and to get that this isn't, I just want to say to anyone listening that we're not talking in metaphor. This is not a metaphor. This is not mythopoetic. This is not language games. This is the nature of reality. Wholeness and the deepest realization, right, of the interior sciences, which you can have in direct experience, right? Actually, reality is wholeness, the God field, becoming more whole. And I can prove it to anyone listening. If you're up for it, I'm going to prove it to anyone listening.
Do it.
Just look into your own experience of self and figure out, are you intrinsically valuable? Are you infinitely valuable? So the actual experience you have is that you are, which is why you're working so hard to survive. Now, you're not working so hard to survive, and you're not thinking about yourself all the time because you're ego-driven, lost, and unenlightened. You're thinking about yourself all the time because you're a unique, crystallized expression of a divine wholeness. Without you, it doesn't exist. So when you're thinking about yourself all the time, you're eavesdropping on God's inner conversation, which is God thinking about you.
Yes, I love it.
So it's right. That's gorgeous. So your unique self is, you're an irreducibly unique expression of the divine love truth, the divine love intelligence, the divine love beauty, the divine love desire. All that is, that's living in you, as you, and through you, that never was, is, or will be ever again other than through you. And as such, yourself has the unique capacity to literally stand on the abyss of darkness and say, let there be light, in a way that no one that ever was, is, or will be can do other than you. So there's a unique corner of the world that's unloved, that can only be loved open by your irreducibly unique gift of loving.
Mm-hmm.
That's what self is.
I love it.
I mean, Paul, oh my God. Oh my God. I mean, I could cry.
It's validation.
I mean, God, that's what
it's validation for being.
it is, the ultimate validation for being. And it's not in a self-help exercise. And it's not in a kind of mythopoetic literary claim. It's actually the deepest truth, right? You're not just a puzzle piece. There's not just a whole puzzle. You're a puzzle piece that completes the puzzle of the whole, that no one else other than you that ever was, is, or will be can do. So in that sense, what it means is God needs you. No, that's an unimaginable sentence.
Well, it is, and it's
Right?
also it's also a sentence that most people trapped in religious dogma would immediately reject, because they're trapped in a dogma, which means they're not asking bigger questions. They've stopped looking.
You are absolutely right, my dear friend, as always. And I think you'll agree, brother, with the second half of the sentence. And psychology would reject it also, because psychology would say it's grandiose. So religion would say it's heretical. Old religion would say it's heretical. And old psychology would say it's grandiose. But the new religion and the new psychology, which have to come together, which gathers the deepest validated insights about the nature of reality, you actually come to realize you are God's unique perspective. God sees something uniquely through your eyes. And you know what? Ultimately, what God sees uniquely through your eyes is herself.
Yes.
God experiences a shocking self-recognition
Absolutely.
when she looks into Paul's eyes.
And looks through them at the same time.
And looks into them and through them at the same time. And if you want to do just with permission, brother, like the yoga of this. So imagine we're both sitting, we're looking at each other's eyes, okay? Looking at each other's eyes, right? So imagine above my head, somewhere around there, about 7 inches, right on top of my head. And I don't want to do it just in a image with my hand for anyone who's not, seeing a screen. So I'll just describe it about, 7 inches above your head in the back of your head. Imagine that you see 2 eyes behind you that are looking through your cranium, right? Through your skull, looking through your eyes. So when I'm looking at Paul, it's actually the divine eyes looking uniquely through my eyes. And when Paul's looking at me, it's the divine eyes looking uniquely through Paul. So when Paul and Mark meet, it's God meeting God uniquely in a way that the divine never encountered herself or himself ever before. And in that meeting, blessing is born. In that meeting, the meta crisis begins to end, because in that meeting, we can't be engaged in a rivalrous conflict governed by win-lose metrics that generates fragile systems, that generates exponential growth curves that fall off, that extracts from the earth resources that took billions of years to create in one generation, right? That actually ignores methane gas under the tundra, that expands the gap between have and have-nots immeasurably, right? That creates an augmented, cognitively enhanced, super race of 0.5%, while leaving everyone else out, a la Hunger Games. No, that's not possible, because every human being is an irreducibly unique perspective of the divine with irreducibly unique dignity. So every human being is a puzzle piece that's needed to complete the puzzle. That's the answer to the question of who are you? That's step 3. That's level 3 of self. That's crazy. Beautiful. That changes the world.
Well, one thing
changes the world, my friend.
It's true, and to drop back on our previous podcast where we talked about love, the description you just gave of God looking through your eyes at me and through my eyes at you, that is the basis of one of my definitions of love. Love is the flow of energy and information through empathic and compassionate connection to self and or other. So it is that relationship that allows God to experience love and is the basis of our experience of love.
No, that is gorgeous. And to just put it in the language we're using now, so to be a lover, There's two dimensions of being a lover. To be a lover is to see through God's eyes.
Yes.
A. And to be a lover is to let God see through your eyes.
Yes.
Wow. So it's two sentences. To be a lover is to see through God's eyes. To love God is to let God see through your eyes.
Yeah, it's
stunning.
it's so true and so beautiful that the paradox of it is, because of so much social and religious programming, it's as though people are looking around everywhere for what they're seeking, but cannot see it, like the 7 blindfolded men don't know that they're touching an elephant and they think it's everything else. That's one of the sort of the mysteries of God, is that it's right in front of you. It's inside of you. It's breathing you. And it's the very issues that lead to this whole not self, it's all an illusion. That is really, I say, take the blindfold off. It's not a wall you've got. It's not a rope you got. It's not a fire hose you got. It's an elephant. It's all God.
Yeah, no. There's if we can honor, right, our scriptural friends, because everyone's at the table, right? We have scripture on this. Ki karov elecha davar ma'od ma'od, right? It's so close to you. It's right in front of you. It's right there. It's right there. And here's the thing. 2 things emerge from unique self, and this is so crazy beautiful. So here's one. You cannot create we space. Capital W, we. You can't create genuine we space, which means genuine communion, at the level of separate self. Because the puzzle pieces keep fighting with each other. There's rivalrous conflict governed by win-lose metrics that dominates the whole system. So you cannot create communion, and you can't create coherence, right? So we've got this meta crisis. The meta crisis is issuing to humanity's existential challenges, which are global challenges. You can only meet them if you can create global coherence. You can't create global coherence at the level of separate self, because you have only rivalrous conflict between individuals, between countries, between companies, between divisions, between regions. Literally, it's the anti-value source code of reality, which is driven by the superficial and degraded visions of power over, right? It's driven by, Sauron's ring, my precious. You can't. Now, here's the thing, though. At true self, all of our Eastern religion friends or mystical friends, and again, I live in that world as well. It's a beautiful world, but true self means there's no distinction. There's just the one. There's just a puzzle. Well, you obviously can't create communion if there's only one.
Right.
Communion means 2 are in communion. So there's no evolutionary we space at the level of true self. You can only create intimate communion, which is what you need for coherence, which is what you need to respond to global challenges, if you have a conception of our identity as unique selves who now can join with their unique instruments and unique self symphony, because uniqueness is not the coin of alienation. Uniqueness is the currency of connection. So all of a sudden, we now begin to see this. Oh, we need global coherence to respond to global challenges of existential risk, but we can't achieve global coherence because we don't have a conception of self. But the second we realize, oh, I'm a unique self, let me just make it really real. Let's say I get on the phone with Paul and I say, man, I really appreciate, our dear friend, in Austin, who introduced us to this guy, Paul. And I really want to use Paul's, Chek's podcast to kind of connect with a lot of people. But, I'm not actually madly in love with Paul. Well, it's not going to work.
No.
It's just not going to work. It's not going. It only works when actually I have such respect for you. And I know all the things that Paul can do that Marc Gafni could never do as well in a million
and
years.
vice versa.
Now,
that's the joy.
But I want to stay with the first. No, I want to stay with the first part of the sentence.
Yeah.
If I can't say that sentence with joy, then I cannot be a lover. And it's a big deal. And everyone's got to get that. If I can't say, and I'm not considered to be an entirely stupid person or without gifts.
No.
And right, and I've got to recognize with mad joy that, oh my God, Paul Chek has a particular range of capacities and gifts that are so stunning, and they're just not my gifts. I couldn't do it if my life fucking depended on it, which is why I get to be wildly excited to meet my friend Paul.
Yes, and vice
Right?
versa. Yeah.
And now if we weren't unique selves, if we were just separate selves, we'd have to be in competition because it's a scarce pie. And from this place of scarcity, we got to seize pieces of the pie from each other. But if we were just true self, it also wouldn't work. It's only when Paul is just in the utter radiance of his uniqueness that I get to be in devotion to. And then Paul, right, because he's seeing through God's eyes, sees Mark, and then we see each other, and then we begin to create synergy and symphony. We begin to create more value.
Yes.
That's how we respond to the meta crisis.
It is. And
It's like,
and
it's stunning.
Isn't it amazing that that's how you create value in a value crisis, not putting more masks on? Because every mask is
right.
a veil between the true self and the unique self and your perception of yourself. Hi, everybody. How'd you like to have more mellow in your life? Well, I know I could use some mellow, and I found a product called Mellow by Ned that actually really does mellow me out, make me feel damn good. And I want you to feel mellow and damn good. So to make sure you understand how to do that, I've got Adrian here from Ned, the creator of the product, to tell us why this product works so well. Adrian, thanks for making a great product. What's unique about it?
Yeah, well, my pleasure, Paul. As you know, magnesium is literally an essential mineral in the human body. It's the fourth most abundant mineral in the body, and it regulates over 300 critical functions, including our mood, our cardiovascular system, our cognitive function, our sleep, and generally just helping us perform. Meanwhile, according to the WHO, nearly 75% of us don't get our recommended daily value of magnesium. And this is due to it being stripped from our food supply, thanks to monoculture and overprocessing of foods. So what that means is if our grandparents ate a carrot in 1940, they would have had 4 times as much magnesium as we get today. So that's why we got together with our expert team of scientists and formulators to craft the ultimate magnesium supplement that is highly efficacious, approachable, and super tasty. So it's crafted with 3 highly bioavailable magnesium chelates, one of it which is sourced from the clean waters of the Irish Sea and includes a bunch of amazing trace minerals. And Mellow gives us 70% of our daily recommended value in a single serving. It's then supercharged with 2 vital amino acids, GABA and L-theanine, to further elevate our mood and our stress response. So all you really have to do to use it is simply add it to 8 ounces of water, and then you get to enjoy calm days, restful nights, and really what it feels like is a balanced well-being. We have it available in 3 delicious flavors. It's sugar-free, it's non-GMO, and free of all the nasty stuff. So all you have to do is go to helloned.com and use the code CHEK, that's CHEK, to get 15% off your first purchase. Plus, every order is backed by our 60-day stress-free guarantee. So if you're not totally in love with Mellow, which I'm pretty sure you will be.
Me too.
We'll give you your money back, no questions asked.